Right, let's enter this now. The IEC and the political parties are signing codes of conduct pledging at various provinces, committing to free, fair and peaceful elections. South Africa will vote in the national and provincial elections in about 40 days from now. For more on that conversation and the significance of these ceremonies, we're joined by IEC KwaZulu-Natal head as well as the Northern Cape counterpart Bonolo Modise as well as Ntombifuthi Masinga. Good to have you both, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. Let's start here. Signing of pledges or signing the electoral code of conduct. Is that enough? We assume that the parties would have signed this, and after signing this, then they go out there and their level of tolerance for one another immediately shoots up. The campaign playing field is immediately leveled up. There is less incitement of violence. There's less false information and so on and so forth. Is that automatic, or is there more that needs to be done? Ntombifuthi?
Signing the code is a legal requirement. All political parties and the independent candidates that are contesting elections have got to commit to abiding by the provisions of the Electoral Code of Conduct. But once they have signed that, they are committing just themselves, not just themselves, but also their supporters and their members. What then becomes important is that you need to have all the players in the criminal justice system in the country lined up to be able to enforce that act. So signing alone is not enough, but we need to have the necessary capacity in the criminal justice system to be able to prosecute people that could be in violation of the code.
Yeah. So, when you hear, for example, religious groupings meeting today, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, saying the level of intolerance there is quite high, and they're calling for a round table kind of conversation to deal with issues of reconciliation because of just the tensions that are happening there. What does that say to you as the IEC?
We have mechanisms in place as an organization. For example, in the province, we have a structure called the Multi-Party Political Intervention Committee, which is a structure made up of all the players in the criminal justice system, but all the leaders of political parties, both at a provincial level and also at district levels, where we create a platform through which we can resolve some of these issues with political parties through mutual agreement between parties, and we are able to say some of these problems are political and they need political solutions. But other than that, there's a lot of other mechanisms that we put in place to make sure that there is a platform for parties to engage on these matters without resulting to violence or without resulting to violating some of the provisions of the Electoral Act. For political parties and independent candidates, it's important for them to promote the code within their own supporters, because usually it's not the leaders of political parties that make these insightful statements, but it is the members and local leaders. So once we have a mechanism through which we can discuss these matters with political parties, it becomes much easier before we go on to more drastic measures where there are penalties applicable for the violations of any provisions of the code.
Yeah. Well, how stringently do parties adhere to these codes? What's the level of adherence and compliance after signing the code?
Well, we as the Commission encourage parties to abide by the Code of Conduct. Compliance, as my colleague Ntombifuthi says, is a difficult one in the sense that leaders can agree on how we need to do our business, but what happens at a lower level could be a completely different story. We see instances where party posters are defaced, where other people are prohibited from using public facilities, and it's a message from all of us that we need to share the space together. We recognize that we all have different opinions on how we see the future of the country, but tolerance is the most important thing, Mr. Mduli, that we should give each other space to campaign and also to express their views freely without being hindered in any way or form.
Yeah. How do you guarantee that playing field when you would have an independent candidate? I've spoken to some. You have smaller parties. I've spoken to some who are saying, well, it's not really a an equal playing field in the sense that, one, there are stringent conditions that are put on us that we as small parties, for example, of signatures and submitting them and so on and so forth, that those things don't come easy for us because we don't have the resources, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the staff that is hired to help us to do that. Two, you speak about availability of advertising space. They say we don't even have those kinds of budgets, that allow us to have even our posters to be up on those spaces, because we are currently underrepresented, and so we don't get our share of whatever resources could be coming from Parliament and everywhere else that other parties are getting.
Well, it is true, but I think those independent candidates who go into the space recognize that it is going to be difficult in the sense that they have to do this on their own, or they need to find sponsorship elsewhere for them to be able to contest with the big boys or big girls who are already on the field. So, Mr. Mdluli, it's a difficult one, and we do recognize that the resources are not equal amongst the parties, but it's a reality that they have to face, unfortunately.
How do you yourself assist for them to have equal opportunities to campaign?
Well, we do that through sharing information with voters for them to understand that this election is going to be different, in the sense that for the first time independent candidates will be allowed to participate in this election, Mr. Mdluli. We also, through a forum called the Party Liaison Committee, share information that they could take to their constituencies to ensure that on election day they understand what it is that must happen, who they are, and how they must vote for them as well.
Yeah. So, Ntombifuthi, I mean, we have been having conversations with the IEC continually on the question of false information. I mean, one of the things that was startling in that conversation with the IEC was that, I mean, especially in the age of digital platforms, right, there is no slowing down of external consultants who are firing at all cylinders, conducting all sorts of campaigns to influence voters in one way or the other. But there's very little capacity to have oversight over that, because it's really happening in the digital platforms and quickly getting onto people's phones. How are you beefing up? How are you ensuring that you're coming on board into this century as far as that is concerned?
We have had to evolve pretty fast as an organization to catch up with the developments within the digital space. We have dedicated capacity internally within the organization that monitors that, but we also work with civil society entities that assist us to track everything that has to do with elections and the Electoral Commission that pops up in the digital space, and we then have to come up with a strategy on how we counter that as an organization. So it's not only something that we do exclusively as the Electoral Commission. We have mobilized other entities within the civil society space that are assisting us with that. The other way of countering those fake news and false information that is pushed through the social media platforms is that we also push our own campaign as the Electoral Commission to educate the society in general on the election frame, because it's very difficult to fool somebody who understands the frame. So our strategy is that in as much as we need to counter false information that is peddled through social media platforms, we have also to be quite aggressive in our civic education campaign through the various spaces where we find ourselves as the Commission, the media, all forms of media, but we also have face-to-face intervention, and we partner with other entities within the state sector, but also within the civil society to educate as much as we can, so that it's not easy for people to believe false information as true.
Yeah. There's a sense, Bonolo, that there's very little reinforcement of accountability of political parties in this case, because candidates can't really do this. But we've been seeing, for example, there's one now that is before the public protector that's been raised by the DA, and I suppose the public protector will have to say whether she's investigating that and whatever will come out of it, of the president making promises on the campaign trail using the government platform in an ANC campaigning environment. There are other opposition parties who are raising this issue of abuse of power, but there is no sense of or even a likelihood of an expectation of those parties facing any degree of accountability. Is that not also part of the electoral code, the fundamental of the prevention of the abuse of power?
Well, you should understand that anything and everything that we do as the Commission has to be guided by the provisions of law and what powers those pieces of legislation give to us. And we are very careful not to tread into spaces that might find us wanting because it is not our territory. As an example, the enforcement of the Code of Conduct is the responsibility of the Electoral Court because there are certain powers that the court has that we do not have. So if the matter of the abuse of state resources is directed at the Office of the Public Protector, it is the right platform that should investigate that matter because as the Commission, our mandate really does not include such investigations, Mr. Mkludi.
So does the code reduce or aim to reduce the likelihood of that happening?
Well, the code largely aims at ensuring that the space in which we operate at this time results in us being able to hold free and fair elections, however other people could view it. So we merely try to put together a set of rules that we request parties, supporters, and candidates to abide by. And if there is failure to abide by that code, approaching the Electoral Court is one of the mechanisms that people can do if we as the Commission fail to mediate or to conciliate whatever might be brought to our attention.
Yeah. Ntombifuthi, I mean, just for clarity, we know one of the parties that said they don't want to sign the Electoral Code because it was not in the language of their preference at the time. And did they eventually sign? But what was the attitude of the IEC to that request?
Unfortunately, in our space, when you communicate with a variety of political parties, with people who have got preference over different languages, we have an acceptable language of business within the Electoral Commission, and that's the language that we use in whatever space that we communicate with political parties. We indicated that we can translate the Electoral Code of Conduct if there's a need, but unfortunately, because that was a public event that was happening at a time, we only had one code that was in English. We clarified this, but the party that had objected initially to sign it eventually signed at the end.
And would you say that would be an acceptance that this is how you operate and there will be no such accommodation even in the future? Because, for example, we have independent candidates, and one of the incidences that happened at one of the signings here in Gauteng was an independent candidate who stood up and said, "Where's my photo? Why is my photo not being put there on the board when the other big parties have got their party branding up there?" That type of situation. So that speaks to an IEC, I suppose, that needs to now understand the new environment that it is working on with independent candidates also coming on board.
No. We are very accommodative. That was a public event that was run in English. But if you observed the various party leaders that signed the pledge yesterday, they actually did that in different languages. They were allowed to use the language that they were comfortable in. And signing the pledge doesn't mean that that's the only opportunity that we have as a commission to take all the contestants through the content of the Edge. We run very comprehensive workshops with political parties where we take them through the election framework as a whole. And the Code of Conduct is one of those things that we workshop with political parties. So that would have been the first time that we take political parties through the Electoral Code of Conduct. The code itself is a persuasive document, but there is prohibited conduct, which is punishable by law. And there is no way that we'll go into an election without making sure that every contestant understands what that means. But also to indicate that when both independent candidates and candidates that are on lists of political parties sign acceptance of nomination to contest an election, embedded in that document is them committing already to abide by the code. What we're doing through this is to bring awareness and is to elevate it. But they've already signed this by accepting to be candidates in these elections, because that is embedded in the documentation that they have to sign, committing that by being candidates in these elections, they will be abiding. So that was not the first platform where they get to hear about the code. They already understood what was in the code.
Yeah. Bonolo, final one as we wrap up. Are you saying to us, and maybe also to the broader electorate and the citizens of South Africa, that when you say in the code there will be swift accountability measures put in place, the expectation should not be that the IEC will be the enforcer of those swift accountability measures? Because, I mean, immediately people, when they want to criticize, they'll say, look at the IEC. People are taking posters down. The IEC is doing nothing. Yeah.
That's exactly what my point
that's for Bonolo. That's for Bonolo, yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Julie, you'd remember that I think it was in the 2019 elections, Good Party submitted a complaint to the IEC about something that the DA had said about their leader, Patricia Dillon. And the commission at the time made a ruling that what the DA had said was wrong and they needed to retract it. And the DA took the matter to the Electoral Court on review, where the court confirmed that we were not supposed to do that because we do not have those powers. And that was also confirmed by the Supreme Court of Appeal, that the IEC does not have powers to determine whether the objection that was raised at the time was wrong, because those powers lie with the Electoral Court and not with us. So it would be very difficult for us to, once again, even after the ruling of the SCA, to try to get into a territory where we are not supposed to be. But by that, we are not saying that we cannot try to find a solution between ourselves and parties if there are difficulties, because we believe that using the platforms that we have is the first forum where we should try to find one another, and if that fails, then of course the aggrieved parties are free to approach the Electoral Court for relief.
All right. Let's leave it at that for this evening. Much appreciated. I thank you both for coming on this evening. IEC KwaZulu-Natal elections ahead, Ntombifuthi Masinga and Northern Cape counterpart Bonolo Modise there.